Botticelli's great painting Primavera, Springtime, is an especially rich example of Renaissance humanism. And I want you to read carefully the textbook's discussion of it. They do a good job on many things, but I also want to add a few points. So this painting is an allegory, as the textbook explains, and I've given the definition of that term. A form of literature, drama, or art in which each literal character, object, and event represents a symbol, illustrating an idea or moral or religious principle. So one question for you as you read through the book and think about this painting is, what is it an allegory of? What is allegorical about this painting? And let me start by saying it's a humanistic painting in its allegory. And it is not Botticelli. Sandro Botticelli, the painter, is not the person who would have come up with the allegory or the humanistic literature that's the basis of this painting. This is made for the Medici as patrons, the Medici family, and they as elites. At this time, by 1482, the Medici have grown so wealthy and so power hungry that they're actually a threat to the Republican values of Florence and are basically have taken over ruling Florence. That's another story for another time. But they actually have a kind of a court, and they have humanist scholars who are part of their court culture who actually formulated the basis for the painting. And this scholar, this humanist, chose a specific Roman text. It's called On the Nature of Things by the Roman writer Lucretius. And here's the text that is the basis that was given to Botticelli to illustrate. On comes spring and Venus's winged harbinger Cupid, and with Zephyr, the west wind, and Mother Flora a pace behind him, strewing the whole path in front with brilliant colors and filling it with scents. S-C-E-N-T-S, fragrance. So there's a lot to talk about in terms of all of these classical figures: Mercury, Zephyr the west wind, and Chloris, the nymph who he is actually raping. In previous editions of the textbooks, they said that he was accosting her, as if they couldn't kind of be honest about the sexual violence that's depicted here. That is part of the painting. It is a painting that shows sexual violence at the root of marriage and marriage as fertility. So it's important in interpreting this painting to know not only about humanism, but also about the social history of marriage as an institution at the time. And so I'm drawing here on the work of a very great scholar, Loren Partridge. He thought deeply about this painting in terms of what marriage was really like, because this painting commemorates a Medici marriage. And Loren, who I studied with at Berkeley, he was very influenced by feminist critique of art history that had been dishonest about how women were represented. And so Loren actually explains that, it was very common in the Renaissance and the medieval world for marriage to be celebrated with image of conquest, of violent overcoming. And one point to know is that marriage in 15th century Florence was completely an economic transaction. The woman's wishes had no standing, so that's being expressed allegorically in this painting. Usually a bride was a young teen, and she basically was contracted between families for social prestige and financial gain. So an actual marriage would consist of an exchange of a dowry, which is essentially a treasure chest, and a counter dowry. So there's a literal exchange of money to make the marriage happen. The counter dowry is what the future husband gives to the family of the future wife, which includes a dress, a feast, a trousseau, a treasure chest, a decoration of the nuptial chamber, which this painting may have been. The nuptial chamber, the bridal chamber. And notice this crazy detail. There was often in these contracts a cash payment that was rendered for the marriage's consummation. Okay, so you can't be more baldly transactional and financially crass about marriage than that. And in fact, there was a tradition on a marriage day of parading the bride through town on the day of the consummation. And we have written records telling us that trumpets would call to the people and that there would be marriage chests, which are called cassoni, and they would show scenes of jousting, basically images of battle and conquering. And so Lauren wants us to see this painting as it would have been experienced in the context of that social reality, and to say that we have an image of a kind of lawless sexuality that involves violence and force being tamed into a a kind of a socially respectable institution that is based on fecundity and fertility. One final note on the classical humanism. These figures, the three graces, are very famous figures that were drawn directly from classical Greek and Roman art. So here you see a sculpture that was Roman artists copying Greek sculpture made around the 2nd century of the Common Era, and then a painting, also a Roman copy, to show you that we're seeing actual Greek and Roman artistic motifs being incorporated into humanistic artworks.